I still remember the look on his face when I told him what I wanted to do. He didn't even laugh, he just stared at me, then shook his head slowly, as if I had said something impossible. "You're not made for this," he said. "Medicine isn't for people like you." Those words became a wall I kept running into for years. I had dreamed of becoming a doctor since I was a child. I used to stay up late reading biology books I borrowed from the library, fascinated by how fragile and powerful life could be at the same time. I believed that if I studied hard enough, I could make a difference. I could help people. Maybe even make my family proud. But pride was never something my father offered freely. He believed in practical things. Work, money, survival. Dreams, to him, were for fools. When college applications came around, I filled out every form myself, memorized deadlines, wrote essays by the light of a single lamp. I still remember the day the letter came. The acceptance envelope with my name printed neatly across it. I showed it to him, heart pounding with hope. He didn't even open it. "You'll thank me later," he said, tearing it in half. "You'd never make it. I'm not wasting a cent." He walked away, and that was the first time I realized that love, in my family, had limits. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway, silent, her hands trembling slightly. She wanted to say something. I could see it in her eyes, but silence was safer in our house. She turned back to the stove without a word. That night, I sat on my bed staring at the torn envelope. I didn't cry. I just folded the pieces neatly and hid them in a drawer, like proof that once, someone believed I could be more. I made a promise to myself. If he wouldn't help me, I'd help myself. Even if it meant walking through hell to do it. A week later, I took my first job cleaning hospital floors. The smell of antiseptic burned my nose, the fluorescent lights hurt my eyes, and my hands ached from scrubbing tiles until midnight. But I didn't care. I was in the building where lives were saved. Every time I passed the doctors in their white coats, I looked at them quietly and thought, someday. He said I wasn't made for this. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't made for the easy version, the one with comfort, approval, and pride. Maybe I was made for the hard one. The kind that hurts before it heals. The days blurred into nights, and the nights stretched endlessly. I woke up before sunrise, caught the first bus, and arrived at the hospital just as the city began to stir. The smell of antiseptic greeted me every morning. Sharp, sterile, and oddly comforting. It reminded me why I was there. I spent my hours cleaning floors, changing sheets, throwing away used gloves and wrappers, watching lives begin and end in the same corridors. I wasn't part of the world of doctors, not yet, but I was close enough to feel it breathing around me. Every time I saw a white coat, something in me straightened, like my soul was standing at attention. Most nights, I left after midnight, exhausted but alive. Sometimes, I fell asleep on the bus, my forehead against the cold window, the city lights blurring into golden streaks. My hands were cracked from bleach, my back ached, but my mind kept whispering one thing. Keep going. There were moments I wanted to quit. When the head nurse yelled because a floor wasn't clean enough, when I skipped meals to save money, when I saw other girls my age laughing with friends while I could barely afford a sandwich. But then I'd pass by the emergency room and watch a doctor fight for someone's life. Steady, calm, relentless, and the fire inside me would burn again. I started reading medical books during breaks, hidden behind supply shelves. I learned about anatomy, about sutures, about the rhythm of the human heart. I didn't have a mentor, or a teacher, or even a desk, but I had hunger, and sometimes that's more powerful than privilege. The hospital staff began to notice me. A few kind nurses would leave old textbooks in my locker without saying a word. Found this lying around, they'd say with a small smile. They knew. Years passed like that. Work, study, exhaustion, repeat. I missed birthdays, holidays, family dinners, though my family rarely called anyway. My father had stopped asking what I was doing. To him, I had disappeared into the world he said I'd never survive in. But one morning, as I stood in front of the mirror of the hospital restroom, scrubbing the stains from my uniform, I saw something new in my reflection. It wasn't defeat. It was strength. Quiet, stubborn, and unbreakable. I wasn't just cleaning the hospital anymore. I was building a life inside it. It didn't happen all at once. Nothing ever does. It was years of long nights, sore hands, and silence. And then, one ordinary morning, everything changed. I remember holding the acceptance letter with both hands, afraid to breathe, afraid it would disappear if I blinked. The ink was still fresh, the paper trembling between my fingers. I had done it. Somehow, through every closed door, every cruel word, every moment of exhaustion, I had made it here. Medical school. The hospital felt different that day. The same hallways that used to echo with the sound of my cleaning cart now felt like the beginning of something new. I passed by doctors I had once watched from afar, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt like I belonged, even if only a little. Classes were hard. Harder than anything I'd ever done. The nights grew longer, the hours crueler. My eyes burned from reading, my fingers trembled after endless practice, and there were days I couldn't afford lunch. But I didn't care. Every word I studied, every page I turned, felt like proof that I was still moving forward. Sometimes, during late-night study sessions, I would close my eyes and imagine myself years ahead, standing in an operating room, my hands steady, my voice calm, saving someone, being the person I needed when I was younger. That image carried me through the worst days. When the time finally came for the white coat ceremony, I could barely stand still. My heart pounded as they called my name, the sound of it echoing through the hall like a promise finally kept. I stepped onto the stage, and a senior doctor helped me slip into the coat. It wasn't just fabric. It was years of pain, defiance, hunger, and hope stitched together. Applause filled the room, but I barely heard it. I was lost in the weight of the moment, not heavy like a burden, but grounding, like purpose finally settling into my bones. Later, when I stood alone in front of a mirror, I traced the edges of the white collar with my fingers. I thought about all the times I'd been told I couldn't do it, that I wasn't enough. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove them wrong anymore. Because I already had. I walked back into the hospital that evening, the same one where I'd once mopped the floors, and passed by the janitor's closet I used to hide in during breaks. The mop still leaned against the wall, the bucket half full of water. I smiled, touched the coat, and whispered quietly to myself, never again. Years slipped by in a blur of white walls and sleepless nights. I stopped counting birthdays, stopped visiting home. My world had narrowed to hospital corridors, textbooks, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Somewhere along the way, the exhaustion became normal, as familiar as breathing. I climbed slowly, one shift at a time. First as a medical student, then as an intern, then a resident. Every mistake felt like the end of the world. Every small victory felt like sunlight through storm clouds. There were days I doubted everything. Days when the weight of the lives in my hands pressed too hard against my chest. But I stayed. I learned. I kept going. The first time a patient thanked me for saving their life, I almost cried. Not because of pride, but because it was the first time in years someone saw me for what I had become, not for what I was told I couldn't be. I bought my own apartment, small and quiet, filled with books and the scent of coffee instead of bleach. My name slowly began to appear on patient charts, on internal reports, even on the hospital's annual board, a name that meant something now. But in the quiet hours after every shift, when the adrenaline faded, a strange emptiness lingered. There was no one to tell. No father to say, I was wrong. No mother to whisper, I always believed in you. Sometimes I caught myself staring at the phone, wondering what I'd even say if I called. Hi, it's me. The daughter you didn't think was worth an education. I did it anyway. But the words always felt too heavy to speak aloud. So I buried myself in work, because healing strangers was easier than healing the silence inside me. Still, every time I walked past the hospital wall with the doctors' names engraved on it, I stopped for a moment. My name was there now, carved in steel, shining faintly under the corridor lights. I used to think I'd feel proud when I reached this point. Instead, I just felt tired, not broken, just worn thin from carrying years of trying to prove that I could be enough. It wasn't happiness yet. But it was something close, peace maybe. A quiet kind of peace that comes after the fight is over, when you finally realize you've already won. It was a night like any other. Long, cold, and endless. The hospital was quiet except for the distant rhythm of heart monitors and the soft shuffle of nurses moving between rooms. I was reviewing patient charts when the intercom called for a senior doctor in the emergency ward. Something in the nurse's tone made me go myself. When I entered, I saw a man on the stretcher, pale, disoriented, his breathing uneven. His clothes were wrinkled, his hands rough from years of labor. There was something painfully familiar about the shape of his face, the lines around his mouth, the stubborn set of his jaw. For a moment, my world stopped. It was him. The man who told me I would never make it. The man who tore up my dreams and called it protection. My father. He didn't recognize me right away. Maybe it was the uniform, maybe the years. I had changed, hardened, grown into the person he swore I could never become. But as I stepped closer, his eyes flickered with confusion, and then recognition. His lips parted, trembling. "You work here." I didn't answer. Instead, I looked at the monitors, checked his pulse, focused on the things I could control, because everything else felt like fire under my skin. The nurse asked if I wanted to switch cases. I shook my head. I stayed. Hours passed as we stabilized him. The diagnosis wasn't good, but it wasn't hopeless. When it was over, I stood by his bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. He looked smaller now, fragile in a way I had never seen before. The man who had once towered over me, whose words had cut deeper than knives, was now lying helpless beneath hospital lights, the same lights that had witnessed my entire climb to this moment. He opened his eyes again, searching for words. "I didn't know," he whispered, voice breaking. I finally met his gaze. "No," I said quietly. "You never did." He tried to speak again, but his voice failed. I could see the guilt in his eyes. Raw, wordless, years too late. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to turn away and let him feel the same silence he had given me. But instead, I stayed until he fell asleep. Not because he deserved it, but because I had spent my whole life trying to be more than the pain he gave me. And standing there, under the sterile glow of the hospital lights, I realized I already was. Morning came slowly, bleeding through the blinds in pale streaks of light. The hospital was quieter than usual, that rare hour between night and day when the world feels suspended. I was finishing rounds when a nurse stopped me. "He's awake," she said softly. For a moment, I just stood there. A part of me didn't want to go. The air between us the night before had been heavy enough to drown in. But something, maybe duty, maybe closure, made me walk back to his room. He was sitting up now, weak but alert. His hands rested on the blanket, veins standing out beneath paper-thin skin. When he saw me, his eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen since childhood. Not anger, not disappointment, but uncertainty. The kind that comes when everything you thought you knew turns out to be wrong. The silence stretched. Machines beeped softly in rhythm with his heartbeat. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I saw the doctors coming in earlier," he said slowly. They respect you." I didn't reply. I was adjusting his foreline when his gaze shifted, past me, to the wall across the room. There, mounted above the glass case of medical awards, was a brass plaque engraved with the names of department heads. Rows of letters gleamed under the morning light, and among them, mine. He stared at it for a long time, his mouth slightly open, as if reading it out loud in his mind. His eyes filled with tears that he tried to hide. His voice came out as a whisper. "That's you." I nodded once. No pride. No triumph. Just truth. He kept looking at it, his face crumbling, every wrinkle folding deeper. Years of stubbornness, denial, and pride seemed to melt away in that moment. He pressed a shaking hand against his mouth, trying to hold in the sob that escaped anyway. I was wrong, he said, barely a sound, just air and regret. You did what I couldn't even imagine. For a moment, I wanted to say something. Maybe, I forgive you. Maybe, I don't need your apology. But the words never came. Because this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about seeing the circle finally close. He looked at me again, his eyes glassy, his voice trembling. I'm proud of you, he said. That was it. Just 4 words. 4 words that had been missing all my life. I didn't cry. Not there, not then. I just smiled faintly and checked his pulse one more time. Steady. Strong. Alive. When I walked out, I passed the same wall he'd been staring at. The metal letters caught the light, glowing softly. For years, I thought that wall was about recognition. But in that moment, I realized it wasn't about him seeing my name. It was about me finally believing it belonged there. He was discharged a few days later. The nurses helped him to the elevator while I stood at the far end of the corridor, pretending to check paperwork. He looked frail but lighter, as if some invisible weight had finally been lifted. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod. No words this time, no promises, just quiet understanding. I didn't follow him. I didn't need to. There were no dramatic goodbyes waiting to happen, no hugs to make up for years of silence. The space between us was still wide, but it was no longer filled with anger. It was filled with peace. Fragile, new, but real. When the doors closed and the elevator descended, I exhaled slowly, as if releasing something I'd been holding for years. For the first time, I didn't feel like the child who had to prove her worth. I didn't feel like the daughter who needed to be seen. I was simply a person who had survived, grown, and built a life out of the pieces she was given. That evening, I stayed late in the hospital. The halls were empty, washed in soft light. I passed the wall again, the one with my name on it, and stopped. My reflection shimmered faintly on the plaque, a ghost from 2 worlds. The girl who used to clean floors and the woman who now healed people in the same place. I smiled, not for anyone else, but for her, for the version of me who refused to give up when no one believed she could rise. She had carried me here. Outside, the rain had started to fall. The city glowed beneath it, silver and alive. I stood by the window for a while, watching the drops slide down the glass, thinking of all the nights I had spent chasing this feeling. The quiet, steady kind of happiness that doesn't ask for approval. Maybe he would never say more than those 4 words. Maybe we'd never be close. And that was okay. Because I didn't need anything from him anymore. I turned off the lights, walked through the empty corridor, and pushed open the door to the world outside. The air was cold, clean, and new. Behind me was the place where I became everything he said I couldn't be. Ahead of me was everything else I was yet to discover. And for the first time in my life, the future didn't scare me. It finally felt like mine.